So I feel like I need to put a massive disclaimer at the beginning of this respective video. And normally I don't usually put disclaimers like this on my videos in terms of things, because I assume that people are going to keep it classy, keep it cool, you know, in terms of reacting to critical reviews and the like in terms of things. But I feel like I need to essentially put a disclaimer on this one. And because I know how the internet is and I know how people react to this respective series. The following review is an entry into the Legendborn series. I start with the first book, Legendborn, followed by the second book, which is Bloodmarked, as you can see here. And then the latter one is Oathbound, which is this big, this very big third book in the series. The main thing that I will say is keep it classy, y'all. People like things that you do not like. People don't like things that you like. And I think it's worth saying that, you know, we all come into different things, have different experiences with different books, and it's valuable to be able to see how things are and be able to critique them in a way that makes people better informed in terms of the things that they're picking up. And we all have different experiences that inform our worldview and the like. I think that's the sum of it in terms of things, but it's probably not going to be as much of an issue for the first book, which is Legendborn, but I definitely expect, since this is part of a series of reviews for the Legendborn series up to Oathbound, which will be the last book that I pick up in this respective series, I think this disclaimer is warranted because it's definitely going to get a lot heated from here. So just letting y'all know ahead of time. But I think Legendborn is probably going to be the more positive of the reviews in terms of things. And then when we get to Bloodmarked and Oathbound, then y'all know where I stand in terms of why I'm not continuing the series. But we'll leave it there. Disclaimer, keep it classy. That's all I ask. And I do check the comment section in terms of things. I haven't had to moderate too much in terms of inflammatory comments on my channel at all since the time that I've been on BookTube. So hopefully I can keep it that way, because so many of you are awesome anyway. But I just hope that stays, because I'm going to have some very interesting opinions and probably not in the popular sort for this respective series. So just putting it out there. Are y'all ready for this review? I can be honest with you and say I'm not. We're going to be talking about the third book in Tracy Deonn's Legendborn cycle series, YA urban fantasy, and it is called Oathbound. This book right here, this whopper of a book right here, 656 pages. I felt the weight of every single one of them. Oh my gosh, y'all. I know I'm going to get some flack for what I'm going to say about this respective series. Like, I'm already prepared for it. I already wrote a very long, comprehensive review on Goodreads as well as my blog. I will link it down in the description below. If you're interested, this video may get a lot of edits in terms of editing rows, like trying to streamline it in a way that makes sense. I know that editing me is going to have to do that also for Bloodmarked, because I got heated in too many sections in terms of things, and I was like, okay, does this make sense? No. I'm trying to avoid that with Oathbound in terms of things, and there was a lot more to Oathbound where I basically, like, in terms of not delving too long on it in terms of things, this was the point where I said I am done with this series, because Oathbound is nothing but abusive relationships from the time that this book starts to the time that it ends. It is abusive relationships, and it does not do well in terms of the community, in terms of what it chooses to do, how it sidelines very important and also sensitive topics in terms of shoving them to the side. A lot of meandering, a lot of disorganization, a lot of pages that were taken up that had no right to be as long as they were. This book wasn't it. Hi everyone, my name is Rose, also known as TA Summers. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. As I mentioned in the intro, this is going to be a review of Oathbound by Tracy Deonn, which is the third book in the Legendborn cycle series. As far as I know of this respective series, this is going to be a four book series from what I gather. I don't know, like we'll see if that actually pans out and it doesn't end up being 5 books instead or more, depending on what happens. I don't have a lot of confidence in terms of it being concluded in a way that's great in 4 books. Judging how the experience of this book came across, I don't know. You know, like I basically said, like in the intro to this video, that my journey with the Legendborn series ends here. I cannot tell y'all, I cannot convey to y'all like what a waste of time this book was. And there's no sugarcoating it. I said before in the intro that Oathbound is basically abusive relations from point 1 of the book to the ending. And it doesn't feel like it doesn't really feel satisfying. It shouldn't take 80% of the book to get to something that actually makes that gets into the scope of the actual like plot moving in terms of things. I don't understand why this book was so well received in the community in terms of the issues that it has, and it's not even really well represented in terms of what it chooses to do, how it showcases Black trauma. And this is a trauma heavy book. The Legendborn series has always been heavy with respect to the topics that it has decided to focus on. It has always been heavy in terms, it started with grief, even in Legendborn, progressed to even more pain and trauma in the second book with Bloodmarked, what it chose to do and the decisions that Bree makes in the spectrum of Bloodmarked, and then now in Oathbound in terms of how it chooses to deal the way that Bree's decisions are coming back to bite her, and essentially what she ends up doing and ends up coming across. It really doesn't make sense that the book chose to go in this direction. Like this whole book drew on for way too long, meandered more often than not, had multiple perspectives in it. Some of those perspectives aren't even necessary, even with some characters where I could say, okay, I like this character, I wanted to see more of this character. The way that it chose to use the spaces of narration in terms of the choices that were made were not great decisions. And essentially they sidelined from Bree's own telling of her own story to cede to majority white characters. So how is this Black girl magic? I don't want an answer to that question. That is a rhetorical question. I'm trying to hold back. I am very much trying to hold back in terms of things, because y'all don't know the harm that this book did. And not even just the fact that it was a long, tedious slog to get through in terms of the writing, mediocre writing compared to the first book. Way downgrade, massive downgrade in terms of the writing and the focus from the first book. Like, we're not, like, I had seen on other reviews how people had commented in terms of where it felt like this wasn't even written by the same person. I would argue I could definitely see shades where this is written by the same person, but the way that it was done indicated to me very early on that it had no idea where it wanted to go, and it was just throwing things at the wall to figure out what stuck. The fact that it had no focus was very evident in terms of where this ended up going, how it chose to showcase some of its respective scenes and characters, and how it undermined several important issues to be relegated as side issues rather than pertinent ones in the realm of abuse. And it was just continuous abuse throughout this entire book. Very few moments of relief, and in the moments where we did see relief, far and few between. The context of those scenes felt like they were very forced. And I would almost say, like, in terms of a lot of the tones in this, it was a very awkward presentation of trying to justify things that really, you could tell it was forcing its hand to justify those things and be expository in trying to justify things that did not line up emotionally with the characters or the situation or the weight of what they were. And I could very much tell that. I would go so far as saying that this book was gaslighting you, lying to you about Bree being a hero, and some of the conflicts, even from the previous book, that it tries to address, but then undermines just as quickly. And I'm like, as a reader, and I know that there are probably teens who feel the same way. It's like, I don't like being lied to. I don't like having my intelligence undervalued in terms of things where I can pick up in terms of saying, that logically does not make sense. You're trying to tell me that this is what I should feel about this certain thing, and you're not addressing the underlying issue that is going on here in terms of things where it feels like a fully centered moment where the character grows from the things that they have done, from the things that they have observed, and I'm speaking specifically to Bree Matthews in terms of where she had no character growth in this novel. None. Absolutely none. And it felt like a waste of time. And I don't know how other people did not pick up on all of that in terms of what it chose to put us through to get to even some of the more pertinent plot points of this respective work. This was not it at all in terms of what was going on, and I don't have confidence that these things will get better in the final book of the Legendborn series. So I think my journey with the series ends here. I don't have the confidence in continuing this series. I don't want to follow Bree Matthews anymore. She's a terrible, horrible human being. Terrible, horrible human being. And we'll get into what she does in this respective work, and also what she doesn't do in this respective work in terms of things, because I think it's important to point that out. It tries to set up and meanders and doesn't have a focus in terms of bringing some of these ideas together. And then when it does bring something relevant to the table in terms of issues such as medical experimentation, trafficking of Black girls, abduction of Black girls, it is very much undermined by the fact that Bree starts off this novel and is not able to do anything because she has had her memory, she suffers from memory loss, and she is in a willfully captive situation, which the terms of which were abusive from the get-go. How is that Black girl magic? How is that not Black trauma? I don't know, y'all. I don't understand the people who try to defend this book as being important to Black people when it undermines them in so many different ways in this book. And even with the the respective trying to center Bree in the focus of things, it does not center any of the other black girls that are in this book. It is almost like Bree's the only one that matters. Everybody else gets shoved aside. And sometimes intentionally shoved aside to make whatever point. And black people, black teens, black kids deserve better quality stories than this. And I'm going to very strongly say that in terms of things. This was mediocre. It really should have stayed in the drafts and been worked on. I don't even know if you could really say that this could have been salvaged in terms of things because of what it chose to do. It's like, you know, do you really care that Bree Matthews has a coming to terms, and at the expense of the exploitation of black people, black girls? Tell me that this novel isn't a complete exploitation of black girls. We'll leave it there. Y'all don't understand how angry this book made me and upset in terms of stuff I was going through, trying as much as I possibly could to be patient with what it was trying to show, making notes, doing things. I even had basically like shared my thoughts with several different people in terms of things, in terms of what it chose to do and where it started, where it began, how it progressed, and where it ended. And they got my my sassiness from beginning to end in terms of things. So, yeah, like, and part of that comes through in my full review on Goodreads as well as my blog. From the 6-part 56-page prologue at the beginning of the book, and it is in Bree's perspective, but I'm like, why did we have to go through a 6-part prologue for this? Why did we have to do that for the prologue of this? Why could that not have been chapter 1 for Bree's perspective? If this is supposed to be Bree's story, if it's supposed to be like, you know, like centering her voice and her experiences, why not start with Bree? And why not keep it with Bree? I could almost understand in spaces where it was relevant, where we needed to see spaces where Bree wasn't introduced to things that she would not have the knowledge base of based on events in the novel. But 6-part 56-page prologue in Bree's perspective, only to see to William for chapter 1, I'm like, If you are expecting to center the black girl who has been telling this respective series, the story of this respective series from the get-go, and centering her voice front and center, it needed to start with Bree. It should have, and it did end with Bree, but it should not have sidelined Bree as long as it did. In terms of things, and I'm going to strongly say that in terms of stuff, it did not need this many side perspectives, and I would even go so far as say some of those side perspectives had no relevance whatsoever. And we'll get to that, the perspective points, in just a moment. But I had said that you could have easily like shaved off 400 pages of this and still been able to streamline some of the major events of this novel in terms of things, but even then, it would still be mediocre for how it chose to handle certain topics, especially some of the heavier topics that this, and triggering, which nobody seems to want to address in talking about it. It is heavily triggering. As a black person, as a black woman, a lot of this was triggering. Getting into the multiple perspectives, another problem was that this had multiple perspectives that it was shifting toward. We have Bree. As I mentioned, William is a part of this, the perspective points in this book, which I do like William's character. I like William's character a lot more in terms of, like, I've consistently liked his character throughout the Legendborn series, and I could see where in specific things where like his perspective on certain things would be relevant if this were a better written novel in terms of including his perspective, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. It was William. Natasia. Natasia is Selwyn's missing mother. She's had a role in the respective other novels in terms of being a side character, but the logic in including her character in this, she was not needed. Absolutely 100% not needed. She could have been tossed. Her perspective could have been tossed and told in other ways, or lent to other people, you know, talking about her, like just streamlining her bits. That was not it. And that perspective could have been left at the table. This is a YA novel. If you are using a middle-aged woman to sexualize her son, that is not the way. Yeah, we'll talk about that in my spoiler part of the review, but I was not comfortable at all in terms of how Natasia's perspective was done and the way that it was done in this novel. It could have been tossed. It could have been tossed completely, and it would not have been a missing thing at all. And what baffles me is that her perspective was chosen over Selwyn's perspective. So Sel is not in this book as prominently. He's pretty much been sidelined in terms of things compared to the last book, which that was a choice. The fact that it's his mom that we get certain pieces of information from and not him himself, I don't understand the choice that went into that. And two other perspectives that were in this novel were Nick. Nick was not a big POV piece in this, but he did have a few, I think either one or two sections in here in terms of where he was talking about past events and certain things that were going on. But mostly the information that we got about Nick was either through William's perspective or Bree's perspective in terms of things. So technically speaking, Nick didn't need to have a perspective point in here, but especially if his was adequately represented in either Bree's or William's perspective, so that could have been cut down. And then the last person, the only other black person in this narrative that was representative was Mariah, and this was an opportunity. This was an opportunity to be able to have another black girl speaking, and what does it do? Centers Bree. Mouthpiece for Bree. Completely undermines her contribution. Mariah's perspective, and I'll get into this in terms of spoiler territory, in terms of what happens. Mariah felt like a mouthpiece for Bree, and that was all her character was reduced to. And I do not like the fact that it chose to do that to Mariah. I'm holding back specifically in terms of things that were done with Mariah's character that really incensed me. It's not just the fact that she's centering Bree the whole time. It's that she's undermining herself, and the other characters are functioning around her to undermine her compared to Bree. How is it black girl magic when you are using one black girl to throw another black girl under the bus? That Misogynoir does not cut it. And it was very obvious through the narrative that was something that was narratively and intentionally done. Like I said, y'all, I am holding back. This is me holding back. I could say so many different things about what I think about that, but I am very much holding back for the sake of respectability. If I can say that I respect this narrative at all, I don't. I don't at all. I don't respect what it attempts to do and some of the things that it tries to do it with. I'm trying to decide whether or not at this point in the video do I mark this with spoilers, because this gets into spoilers for what happens at the end of Bloodmarked going into Oathbound. And if you have not read Legendborn, if you have not read Bloodmarked, this is your warning in terms of things that happened that are going to be revealed in terms of plot points. And by this point, I think y'all understand in terms of what my general issues were with Oathbound. We're going to start getting into the very specific play-by-play of what happened in this novel, how it basically completely dropped the ball. So,
Hey y'all, Edison Rose here. So I'm gonna say that I forgot to actually mention what I rated Oathbound overall before I get into the spoiler heavy part of this video. You can probably already tell from my tone and everything that I expounded upon that I gave this book 1 out of 5 stars, and I will not be continuing the Legendborn series from this point on. You will be warned there are some very heavily triggering uh, topics to come in the spoiler heavy part of this video. Please take care of yourselves. Skip over the parts that you need to. I had definitely had a rough time recounting several of the things that happened in this respective book, and you can kind of tell that from when I was recording this in one sitting in terms of things. I gave this book 1 out of 5 stars. Will not be continuing with the series, and this is your warning that we're going to get into major, heavily spoilers territory for Legendborn, Bloodmarked, as well as Oathbound in the next section. So just FYI.
this is your warning. Everything else from this point on in the video is spoiler territory, and we're going to get into it. So, this is your warning. Timestamp in the thing, bookmark placed. Let's go ahead and begin. So this book starts off where Bloodmark ended in terms of Erebus being revealed as the Shadow King. All of the events in Bloodmark in terms of that final encounter where Alice is in a coma after Bree was taken over by Author in terms of things. She put out Bree slash Author put Alice in a coma, basically beat up Nick, forced Cell to sacrifice his humanity to save Bree's life, and yet at the end of Bloodmark, Bree walks into the arms willingly to Erebus, to the Shadow King, to make a deal and say, teach me how to use my magic. She has burned her ancestral plane. She cannot access her abilities or her ancestors or anything else because she's burned it away for reasons that this book tries to justify in many different spaces, and we'll get to that when we get to that in terms of like some of the reckonings. But her decision didn't make sense then, and it does not make sense even at the beginning of this book. But we know that she starts making a deal with Erebus to be able to control her magic, to be able to wield it in a way that's offensive. So that's where this starts essentially. And I'm going to go ahead and tell y'all this in terms of how long Bree is missing. She is missing. She's not on the campus of UNC. UNC kind of gets sidelined in this. Like, it's not even taking place in Chapel Hill for much of this novel, if at all. It is chiefly in Asheville and other places. Bree, it makes a deal with the Shadow King, with Erebus. White dude. Because that's how it is. It's continuous cycle of white people abusing black girls. Tell me how this is black girl magic. Yeah, let me not go there. Let me not go there. But essentially, because I'm trying to streamline this as much as possible, I could go into it. But after casting aside her ancestors in terms of things, Bree makes a deal with Erebus to train her. Of course, he asks her, like, what are you willing to give up? And she says anything. And of course, he takes something from her, and it's not even just Excalibur, the sword, which she can't wield it now. She can't wield it to its full effect because she's burned her ancestors and her connection to that, as well as Author. and essentially like has just her base level of root craft in terms of things, and the blood mark that's on her, which Erebus controls. Which again, white man controlling the black girl. Keep it going. She opted to, like I said in my review, she opted to go with the evil incarnate to get her magic training. So that's basically what happens. And while she is in Asheville, while she's willfully captive in Erebus's area to train and to be able to hone her abilities, she is in the company of two black demons. Yes, black demons, including one demon who is only the second black boy character to be in this work, and he's a demon, which figure that part out for me. I don't understand. I really don't understand, but why all the black boys have to be demons in this series. That was certainly a choice. But we'll keep it going. So essentially these demons are twins. Their names Zoel and Elijah in terms of things. Zoel is also known as Zoe, which if I say Zoe, I mean Zoel, like same character. But essentially while in captivity and while Bree is training, she is subjected to both Erebus and these demon twins in terms of her training, and they are brutal to her in terms of things. Even from the get-go, she is it's told she has 10 minutes to run, and they just go after her in terms of the things. Of course, they learn very quickly not to feed from her because her blood mark basically is corruptive and could kill them if they feed off of her in terms of things, which both Zoe and Elijah learned that very quickly. So we start off with that particular torment in terms of Bree's perspective, in terms of the start of her respective training. Fast forward to William's perspective in the first chapter, because I'm not going to recap the first 56 pages. That's basically the first 56 pages in a nutshell in terms of what happens to Bree. Then it shifts perspectives to William, who is kind of encapsulating what happens while Bree is gone. Nick returns to the council and has to be in front of the other lieges. He turns himself in to their control for the murder of Zhao, who was one of the Mageborns that killed his father and tried to kill him in Bloodmarked. And he turns himself in, and then Will is lamenting a lot of different things. He's lamenting the fact that Bree is missing. Nobody knows where she is. He's lamenting the fact that the council essentially is holding Nick on trial for this killing, which, justifiably speaking, Zhao tried to kill him and accidentally killed his father. And Nick has no remorse. He is an angry boy, and part of it also is his anger is part of Nick's anger is anchored to Selwyn being missing and embracing his demon side, and nobody really knowing where he is, except for the fact that some people know that he is with his mother in terms of things in a place where he's being confined. So that's basically Sel's fate. We'll get to his mother's perspective in a little bit, but I'm trying to think if there's anything else from William's perspective that mattered in terms of things. I did, in some momentary aspects of this, I liked William's camaraderie with Larkin. There was more of that in this book. There was hints of it in Bloodmarked, but there was more of that connection for them, even if it wasn't front and center in this book in terms of stuff. And I did like that aspect of that. It didn't salvage the narrative for me, but I did like that aspect in terms of things. And it really wasn't a focus compared to the central triangle of Bree, Sel, and Nick. So I'll just leave that where it is. Other things about William: he tries to care for, he's trying to care for Alice, but Alice is in a perpetual coma right now. Like, given the attack, like that happened in terms of Arthur possessing Bree's body, and Bree and Arthur basically throwing her against the side of a van. She's in a coma, and I'll go ahead and say this about Alice's perspective, like Alice's predicament right now. She is in a coma where there's magic that's coming from her in terms of stuff and keeping her alive, but she is in this stasis state where she is reliving her last moments of the battle that happened in Bloodmart, and she's in this perpetual state of limbo is the best way to say it. So she's reliving the last moments, and in terms of her role in the respective battle, and essentially reliving the moment where she thinks she failed Bree. So that's important context for where that'll become important as I get towards the collective events towards the end of the novel and why that matters. But that's essentially William's perspective. Now, Natasia is Selwyn's middle-aged mom who knew Bree's mother, who was one of the Merlins, very much in terms of how she was used by the council, by the lieges, in terms of her respective role, and she was insinuated to have lost her, her humanity, and other things that were undermining her role. But she essentially gets a hold of Selwyn as he's recovering from events in Bloodmart at the end of the battle in terms of things, and you could tell that Selwyn is not okay. Not okay at all in terms of things. The thing that disturbed me most about Natasia when I was reading those perspective points, at first it starts off as audio recordings where she is talking about Selwyn being in her care, but not only narratively did they not make sense as audio recordings, it felt a lot like authorial intrusion in terms of how they were presented. And it was very obvious from the get-go in terms of Natasia's perspective that her perspective was weird. Her perspective was very weird, and weird in a bad way, where she was not only undermining aspects of her own sanity, which is a weird thing to project in audio recordings, but also the way that she observes Selwyn and makes remarks about him, his life, his body, tattoos, things like that, felt very creepy for a middle-aged woman who is Sel's mother reflecting upon her son. I did not like Natasia's perspective at all in this work. It was not needed. It was not necessary. Why we were put through that, I don't know. And what's even worse is how the narrative went on to include her character, even to the point where it's like we see these asides where she's interacting with Selwyn, who is being held against his will in terms of things, and he hates the fact that, he has to share the same space with her in terms of things. But, and I'm going to say this very bluntly, this is continuing the abusive relationship type aspect of this respective novel, because it details very much in certain sections where Natasia is beaten up by her son. And there is something to say about this work and its continued focus on violence against women, not even to the point where it's knocking it down, but it's showcasing it in a way that really feels like it's for show, for shock value, for doing nothing constructive with it in terms of things. Like we really did not need to know how many bones Selwyn broke on his mama. That was a choice. The wrong one, I will say, very bluntly. Wrong choice. And even though, Natasia is trying to help her son in terms of his corruption, in terms of things, like he ends up getting away and after basically beating her up in terms of things, and she is in bad shape once he beats her up, when he escapes in terms of things. And yeah, just the way that he treats her is absolutely terrible. And you can tell I'm not a Cell fan. I'm not a Cell fan at all. So some of this, even though it tries to play up Cell's character, it does not make him look good at all in terms of things. And we'll get to more of that later in terms of things. But one other pertinent point where Natasia shows up is when she realizes that the lieges, when she realizes the council is after Bree's father, Edwin, because of what he knows. And there's one pertinent scene where, and it relates to her relationship with Bree's mama in terms of things, and that's another point of this that I did not like in terms of things, because why did we have to hear from a white woman to speak for a dead black woman? Why did we need that? Not like it's twofold in terms of where Natasia's perspective really just does not serve this narrative. Number one, she's speaking for her son. And well, like in terms of things, I don't like the fact that he was abusive towards her, like in terms of beating her up to the point where her bones and things, and she's struggles to fight. But the other part of it is that she is speaking where other black characters could have been used to speak for themselves. And maybe it wouldn't have been Bree's mama that provided that narrative, although that would have been an interesting creative choice if, and I had said this to some of my peers, like, why couldn't we have had, if there was going to be an adult character to follow, or even like a character like that would fit the scope of this narrative, why is it that we couldn't have had Bree's mama in a series of journals talk about her own experiences in terms of reflecting on the past, in terms of things? And why do we need Natasia to speak for Bree's mama when Bree's mama is no longer here? She did speak for her relationship to Bree's mom and their friendship, but it was very threadbare in terms of narrative focus. The other aspect was that in the scene, in the pertinent scene that I'm talking about, where Natasia meets up with Edwin, Bree's father, where she saves his life in terms of the people who are targeting him because of Bree. She comes in basically fighting. She's already injured from what Selwyn did to her, but she comes in swinging and saves him. He comes out of the house in his bathrobe, and his blue bathrobe, and he's like, what in the world is going on in terms of things? And he sees Natasia, and he wants to help her, but she says, don't move me, don't touch me. And he was like, okay. She says, don't call the cops, but to Edwin's credit, he claps back with, hell no, I am not calling the cops, when they might think I did this to you, that I harmed you and hurt you in the way that you're hurt, but I will not call the cops for that things. Which, to his credit, he's right on the money in terms of what people would perceive in terms of that situation, in terms of police brutality and stuff. But I was like, did we need to know this from Natasia's perspective in terms of some of the insights and the things that she says in this? Why not give that narrative focus to Bree's father instead, in terms of things. Center a black man's perspective in terms of things where he's not only reflecting on his relationship with his wife, but also the relationship with his daughter and her growing up and Alice growing up with her and things like that. He would be the perspective that would be more pertinent than Natasia was in this situation. Missed opportunity. And it's not that even that Natasia really has much to say, like in terms of stuff. We get glimpses, but it's nowhere near the level of investment that character development, character situation allows for. So Natasia's perspective was not it in terms of things, but to summarize, like what that particular scene was meant to do, Natasia pulls out a ring that was pertinent to Edwin, to Bree's father, because Edwin was mesmered, and part of his lost memory is it contained in this ring, because Bree's mama tied some of his lost memories to this ring, and all he has to do is put it back on, and essentially his memories will return. And it was done as a way of protecting him in terms of things. I'm like, y'all, again, if there was an adult perspective to be had in this novel other than the teens themselves that are mostly perspective points, if you wanted to include an adult, it should have been either Bree's mom through journal entries or some kind of like recounting of events in terms of things, or Bree's father, because it would make the most narrative sense. Natasia's perspective did not make sense, and not only that, it gave room to elevate the abuse that is in this work. Again, abuse, beginning to end. Nick's perspective didn't really have that many points in this respective work when he came up. He was only one or two sections of the book, as I mentioned in my review. Mostly it was Eyes to the Past, but he did play a more significant role in this book than Sel did, and most of those parts were covered by Bree's perspective. So to ask the question in terms of stuff, did Nick really need a perspective in here? I don't think he did. I think other people or other streamlined events in terms of things could have provided Nick's perspective, so it really wasn't needed. Then now we get to the point where I'm at the perspective point where I feel like there was more manipulation in terms of how she was presented in this work, and just done very dirty. I'm talking about, of course, Mariah. Mariah is the only other black girl that is given a perspective point aside from Bree, and what does it choose to do? I had mentioned before in my non-spoiler part of this respective review that basically Mariah's character was reduced to being a mouthpiece for Bree, and it may not come across in terms of how, do I use the term insidious? I'm tempted to go there. I am very tempted to go there. It's almost to the point where it's insidious, because it's like the only there's really no relief for Mariah in terms of being the person who is not Bree, and that is made clear, abundantly clear, by multiple perspectives in terms of things. Mariah says this about herself, other characters, including Valak, who has the nerve to say that you are not Bree. Your own cousin says that about you. What does that say about your contributions in terms of things? I am not here for the undermining of one black girl compared to another. That is a misogynoir. That is absolute 100% misogynoir in terms of things. And it's not even a matter of, let's say that this is Mariah's perspective in terms of things. We can have, if this were not so intentional in terms of the way that it was undermining Mariah's character, like I could probably on a base level say that maybe Mariah was not as like, if she were a more introverted character who was unsure of herself and her abilities and her ability to be able to do things, maybe I could say, like, for a perspective in terms of a point, she's like, maybe like she's not sure of where she needs to go or what she needs to do in terms of things. If that were a part of her personality where she is not as confident and she has to work up towards to being confident in terms of stuff, that would be more fulfilling and more believable. But for the way that Mariah was presented, that was not the case. It was directly in terms of her worth being compared directly to Bree. And that did not sit well with me. Obviously, in terms of things, in terms of how I talked about it in my review, I'm like, and it also is very telling in terms of how the other characters undermine her characters in saying she's not Bree. So that was a choice. Wrong choice in terms of things. And it's not even that Mariah doesn't do anything in this novel, like, to kind of give a summary in terms of what her role is here. Mariah is basically part of the team that's looking for Bree in terms of wondering where on earth she is, like, for the 4 months in terms of things. And she's also taking care of things in terms of monitoring what's going on with Alice, in terms of working with Valak, which Valak is still... like, even I had said in my, like, some of my reflections, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about Valak in this respective work. I don't really have any positive things to say about him, much like Cell, in terms of things, because even though he is trying to help lead the charge with Mariah to be able to find out where Bree is and figure out what's going on, it still feels like their characters are not characters in of themselves, and they are only in service to Bree in terms of stuff. And I can understand where, you know, Mariah is concerned for Bree's well-being, and maybe even Alec, I can understand, like, he's concerned for Bree's well-being, but it doesn't come across in a way that's organic in terms of how it's portrayed or written in this work. And for what Mariah ends up doing, especially in terms of the search, in terms of where she plays a role even in the final battle, in terms of using her magic to the point where she can't anymore. She helps out the group in a lot of different ways that feel like it's directly undermined in the narrative, compared to where Bree's perspective is more centered. And I was not okay with that. And as I mentioned before, that's Misogynoir. Trying to undermine one black girl in service to another, that is Misogynoir. Tell me again how this is black girl magic. Tell me again how this is black girl magic and respecting the agency of individual black characters. You cannot tell me that as a black woman when I see it right in front of me and where it's very obvious. Any less would be trying to lie or gaslight me into thinking otherwise. And I'm going to leave it right there. Let's circle back to Bree now that I've summarized basically what the other perspective characters have already, basically like the overarching like scope in terms of what their roles were and the summary of their particular sections. Now, Bree is really a static character throughout this entire narrative in terms of things, and it is so disappointing, like, because at least in Legendborn we follow Bree being 16 years old and navigating a lot of grief and a lot of trauma associated with the death of her mother, learning about her abilities, learning about her role in terms of being the scion of author and a lot of different things in terms of stuff. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of weight for a black teenage girl, for anybody, but especially for a black teenage girl, and especially with some of the details of how she came to be the scion of author, rape, might as well say it in terms of things. And, you know, she was the proof of that in terms of claiming the scion of author. What author does to her in terms of manipulating her into doing things at the end of at the end of Bloodmart. And then now we have her in yet another abusive relationship with a white man who's controlling her in terms of, or manipulating her, like basically manipulating the situation to his advantage in order for her, Bree, to get something that she wants. How is that black girl magic? I had said this also in my review, like, you know, in terms of things, Bree is not the character we introduced to. I would say that she is much more insufferable at this point in terms of things, and the narrative keeps trying to beat you over the head in terms of trying to convince you otherwise, in terms of how little Bree does. She like, it tries to tell you that she's a hero. It tries to tell you that she's great. It tries to do through the mouthpiece of other characters, including her father, including Valak, including Mariah, including William, including other characters, that she's great. And I feel like I was watching the last episode of the original series of Neon Genesis Evangelion, where all the characters, all the cast of characters surround Shinji and tell him, congratulations. Is not, her greatness is not earned. Her greatness is not earned. It doesn't feel earned. It feels like it's trying to remind you that Bree is great, but what has she done? And this is a consistent thing, like, throughout the series, especially with respect to blood, like, in terms of, this is not a new thing in Oathbound at all. This was definitely something that started out in Bloodmarked. In terms of things, in terms of stealthily dodging certain issues and certain things, in terms of critiques and criticisms of Bree's character and her relationships and things like that. It's like the narrative is intentionally trying to tell you otherwise, in terms of what to think and feel for Bree's character as the person who is the chosen one, as the one who is doing certain things to be brave and be a hero and everything else, and her actions don't line up with that. And even in Bloodmarked, it's like her relationship with Cell in terms of her cheating with him is barely addressed. Throwing her ancestors on the bus and erasing her ancestral plane is kind of glossed over in terms of the weight of it. You get more of the same of that in Oathbound in terms of things. You have other characters like Mariah and Valak who tell her, specifically Bree, you know, you erased your ancestral plane. As a result of erasing your ancestral plane, you have severed you have allowed the scheme of events to actually happen. And I'll get to what happens in terms of how Erebus, the Shadow King, manipulates that particular thing. But they go one moment for scolding her, and then the next moment they praise her and try to write it off like it wasn't a thing. Like, you had to fall to get back up. I'm like, at what point did she fall and learn from her mistakes? At what points? There's no growth. Bree had absolutely zero growth in this novel. None. She says that she made mistakes. Even Zoelle, who ends up being a reluctant ally, and I'll get to the section where she ends up collaborating with Bree in terms of things, but ends up going on assignment with Bree in terms of a certain section in terms of things while she's under the willfully captive situation with Erebus. But even Zoe gets into scolding telling Bree that she's fine having erased her ancestral plane, and saying, you can apologize to Vera if you want, but let it go. I'm like, why would you say that? Oh my god. Especially with the way that Bree went off on Vera in Bloodmarked, in terms of stuff, how disrespectful and just laying into her ancestor as a means to an end in terms of things, and blaming and belittling her. I'm like, And it shouldn't take another black person demon character, might as well say it, telling her, oh, just, like, you did the thing, ignore it, you're gonna spend your time regretting it, move on. No. Mm-mm. As another instance of narrative influence in terms of things, and it was very obvious when that went down. I was like, Bree is not learning from any of this. Y'all are giving her passes and not allowing her to actually reckon with the weight of her actions in terms of things. There is a moment where Bree shares the truth with her companions in terms of things that happen during the 4 months that she is captive in Erebus's, but that is not an excuse to not have her reckon with the stuff that she has done up to that point. And it doesn't feel earned, it doesn't feel satisfying in terms of how it tries to gloss over those transgressions and basically prop Bree up without having her really come to terms. She has no growth. And oh boy, like, if we're talking about latter events of the novel, like this particular book has, I think, 4 main sections, including and that doesn't include the prologue. Part 3 is probably the longest part of the book in terms of things that happen, and it is a slog to get through. I think it was over 200 pages alone, which that could have been cut down. That could have been cut down for the assignment in terms of things, and I'll tell y'all what happened there. So basically, like, while Bree is in the tutelage of Erebus in terms of him teaching her power and essentially saying, I'm going to still continue to manipulate you for my own means, but I'm going to show you how to use your magic. He has her, like, he basically has the demon twins basically, like, go in terms of being able to retrieve the shadow crown that he's looking for based on some information that happens in terms of the earlier events in the novel. And Bree goes with Zoel undercover at this auction house with a demon who is leading things in terms of stuff. It's a house of well-to-do, mostly, like I think all of them are like white people in terms of things. And Bree is basically, like, sneaking in disguise with Zoe to be able to get the crown and get more information on the crown. Ends up fighting a mysterious person who happens to be Nick. And this is another preface of this, which I haven't really gotten into beyond the mention in the non-spoilery part. Bree does not have her full memories. And part of the reason why Bree does not have her full memories is because of the manipulation that Erebus exploits. So Bree cannot remember the faces or the names of people she knows in terms of things in order to fully allow her to hone her power. So basically, it's like he capitalizes on erasing that part. It's deeper than a mesmer, but it's an exploit that is allowed to happen because Bree burned away her ancestral plane. And what Erebus does is that he takes advantage of that by disconnecting her, the pieces of her memories that she's missing of the people that she knows, takes it as collateral, and basically says, this is the thing that's holding you back, your relationships, or your memory of relationships and things like that. Stuff that you can't remember is holding you back from honing your true power and potential. So I'm going to take this from you and then allow you to train under me in terms of things. So he manipulates her in that way. So her memory loss is a big thing that allows her to go with Zoe and Elijah when they are doing errands for Erebus in terms of things during her 4 months of captivity. During this time, they are trying to find the Shadow Crown and find information about the Shadow Crown. So they go to various places, including seedy underbelly type club type of situations, where, including at one point, and this is a side point of the novel, this is not the main point of the novel, which it would be a completely different novel if it was. But during one of the times where Elijah and Zoe are trying to find information about the Shadow Crown, Bree takes a break and goes into the bathroom and witnesses a root crafter girl, black girl, getting assaulted by a grown white man who is a warlock. And she tries to tell Bree not to get involved, leave her alone, you know, like in terms of stuff. She was like, I'll be okay, leave me alone in terms of stuff. But what is really actually happening is that warlock trafficked that girl away for her magic in terms of things to be manipulated in some way. And you're not sure of where she is being taken away from, but Bree goes out of the bathroom and tries to tell Zoe, hey, this girl, this root crafter, this young black girl is being like taken by a warlock in terms of things. But by the time you know, like Zoe thinks that Bree is trying to escape, and so basically chastise her. But by the time Zoe and Bree go out to follow the root crafter girl, she's gone. And basically is trafficked away in terms of things, which, Charma, y'all think it's black girl magic for a grown white man to traffic away and assault and traffic away a black girl for her magic? That's a choice. And I mean, at the bare minimum, yes, Bree highlighted this point, but it's not like she can do anything because she's willfully captive in the hands of another white man who is manipulating her, you know? And I want y'all to sit with that for a minute here. Because the thing about it is, if Bree was heroic, if she wasn't in a space herself where she is willfully in a situation where she is being abused, she probably would have been able to go after that girl and save her herself. And I want y'all to understand that. How the framing of that looks. And why I'm so angry about how events transpired in this work in terms of the way that it did. Moving forward, like fast forward to events where Zoe and Bree are at that auction in terms of things going undercover to get the shadow. Knowing that she is missing her memory, she doesn't remember the people who she should remember in terms of faces and names and things like that. So she does not recognize Nick when she comes across him in terms of them trying to steal something, like looking for something to steal, which is presumably the Shadow Crown. But Nick is not aware that Bree has lost her memories, nor is he aware that she is basically under the tutelage of the Shadow King and the deal that she has made with Erebus. So yeah, he is very much confused. He is relieved to see her, but Bree is uncertain because she thinks, because of Erebus's manipulation, she thinks that the people who remember her will not want to see her or have anything to do with her because her memories are gone. I want y'all to sit with that a minute in terms of how this whole situation is traumatic, especially for a black girl being at the center of it. And yes, Bree and Nick have some tender moments in the spectrum of this respective auction in terms of things. There's moments where they like being outside of Zoe's character in terms of things that basically their plan goes bust, and in order to not be caught, Nick and Bree agree to be a couple that's on the guest list in terms of things, which throws Bree and Zoe's plans into limbo in terms of things. And essentially, like, you know, like Zoe finds out that Bree is the scion of author, which that doesn't go over very well with Zoe in terms of stuff, especially since Zoe tries to attack Bree after that happens, says you're a liar. But eventually, like, you know, like Zoe realizes the bigger picture in terms of them is trying to get the crown and figure out a way to get through this 3-day extension period of an auction that is supposed that the Shadow Crown is supposed to be at in terms of things. So their main purpose being at that auction is to get the Shadow Crown, respectively, for the Shadow King. Nick had his own company that he came with, which was a Morgan in terms of stuff. I think her name was Ava. She agrees to help Nick in order to be able to get the Shadow Crown for the reason that a part, and it's revealed later in the spectrum of events, but there's a piece of the Shadow Crown that is buried in Nick's chest, which I was okay with the fact in terms of seeing what Nick's motivation was in terms of being at that auction, in terms of why he would have an investment of getting the Shadow Crown and how it personally impacted him. But at the same time, in terms of things, you can tell that this particular section drew on for way too long in terms of revealing pieces of information. A lot of it was focused on the meandering parts of this respective well-to-do white space, demon space, in terms of things for this respective auction, and them having to play certain parts. What ends up happening in terms of this auction, there's a moment where the auctioneer, who is a demon, ends up basically he does not want intruders in his space whatsoever, so he brutally kills people and manipulates people who he thinks are there to undermine him. And there is one respective scene where he ruthlessly kills the attendee on stage and tortures them, but then in the next scene it's like Nick is subjected to the same interrogation technique, and it's basically a love confession for Bree, which causes all the demons and the attendees to go like, "Aw," I'm like, disconnect. That was moving forward. And I'm trying to recall events and streamline it as best I can in terms of things. So I know this is going to be a long section in terms of things, but because it's a long section in the book. But at the end of the auction, Ava, who's the Morgan that's with Nick, ends up bidding and having the successful bid for the Shadow Crown. And, Nick is there and he witnesses it. But as a side note, and let me remind you, this is a side note that none of them knew whatsoever, that had been kind of conveniently pushed to the side in light of all of these different happenings going on. The very last piece of the auction wasn't even the Shadow Crown. It was these trafficked root crafter black girls with their magic and presumably their bodies being sold at auction to the highest white bidder. Tell me that is not black girl trauma. Tell me to my face how manipulative that is. Goodness. And aside, it wasn't even the main reason why Nick and them were at the auction. They were there to get the Shadow Crown, but yet this particular piece sidelined, addendum, not even the pressing point in terms of the events of this novel. The black girls who were trafficked and stolen for their magic were the last piece of this trauma heavy book. Tell me to my face that was not a manipulative move. You don't care about the well-being of black girls. They only cared as a side piece when that was revealed. It was not a continued point up to that point in terms of things. It only came up at that respective point, and even at that respective point, it was like, yes, we're trying to figure out, in terms of, how to stop this in terms of things, but it ends up that the auction is thrown into turmoil after that point because they can't decide in terms of who gets the girls, in terms of their magic, and in terms of things. They accuse the demon auctioneer of manipulating events, and of course it's all these white people that are mad about it in terms of things, in terms of auctioning off the black girls, and so it causes chaos and gives room for the group to escape with the Shadow Crown, which has been left aside because the Morgan who was supposed to retrieve it left it behind. Which, how does that make sense? So yes, the group ends up getting the Shadow Crown, but they also get caught by Erebus, who is not a happy camper. Who is absolutely not the happiest camper. And there's no way for him to be able to get the Shadow Crown for himself in terms of things, because it has to be, because he's cursed from touching it, and he needs a Morgan to undo that curse. And of course, the Morgan is missing. Ultimately, what happens is Valak comes to bail them all out in terms of things, and includedly, they end up getting the Shadow Crown in terms of things, and events happen where they are able to make it back to Volition to be safe in terms of things, and try to figure out what next steps are. And then at Volition, it's where Bree unexpectedly is reunited with her father, as well as Natasia. A lot happens there. That was part 3, and then now we're getting into the last part of the book in terms of where the final showdown happens. This is also a side note. It's like, what happened to the black girls who were trafficked in terms of things. At Volition, in terms of things like, people were like, scolding Bree in terms of burning her ancestral plane, and this is where, like, those events that I mentioned earlier happen, where basically Valak chews her out, Mariah chews her out in terms of things, in terms of burning away her ancestral plane and allowing Erebus to manipulate that fact, because she reveals that she can't remember anybody in terms of things. She's lost her memories. There's and Valak basically tells Bree that there's really a very slim chance, if at all, that she'll ever get those memories back. He tells her straight up, but at the same time still manages to praise her in terms of things. And same thing with Mariah, and same thing with Zoe, who is a part of the group in terms of, like, being able to escape. Elijah presumably is still with Erebus in terms of things, so he's not part of their group. Bree is just getting these very, like, empty praises in terms of things, and Bree learns at Volition that the Rootcrafter girls were freed. She didn't do anything to free them. That was all Will and Larkin's doing, which is revealed to the side. Again, it's not even a focused operation in terms of things. The choice to... I feel like that was a missed opportunity in terms of Bree being able to be part of that operation and get those girls out, too. If she was able to... but, Will and Larkin, bless them, did the work, got those girls out, got them safe, great. In terms of basically the information that was given at the auction in terms of things allowed them to go after them and get the girls out, and it's revealed. But they praise Bree for it, even though, like, she alerted them to it, but it wasn't her doing, and it was a side fact that they discovered at the auction in terms of things. So I didn't like that. I didn't like the way that was done. Essentially, at Volition, they're allowed to regroup and have a confrontation with Erebus in terms of final showdown types of things, to be able to do things. And by the way, Bree does see Alice during this point, and remember, and it's like she's told about Alice in terms of things, and she recognizes that her friend is still in a coma in terms of because she doesn't have these memories herself. She is told and basically caught up with people in terms of who her relationships are in terms of things, because she admits that she lost her memory. I go around at doing a final confrontation with Erebus in terms of getting Bree's memory back, and this is where the plot goes full steam ahead towards the ending. Here's what happens with the ending that made me say I am done with this series. And I don't care about Bree Matthews whatsoever in terms of things. They get to the final battle, and Selwyn shows up in terms of things. Like, he's full demon mode now. He does not have a care in the world, and he's obsessed with Bree's magic. Oh, there was a line. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can remember where this line was in this book. Yeah, there's a whole section here where the group reunites with Cell, and they definitely, and this is before they get to Erebus, like in terms of the final confrontation, the final battle in terms of things. And Cell is just going off with respect to taunting Nick. I think he even has the nerve to say, Cell has the nerve to say, "Hello, Brianna." And "Hello, Nicholas. Thanks for the light. I do want to get a good look at her." Essentially, like, he says, he talks about being the King's Mage in terms of, Nick reminds him that he's still a King's Mage. Essentially talking about, how Bree is the, true scion of Arthur, about the relationship he has with Bree. Says about Bree, and this is on page 621 for reference. He says, this is Bree recounting this in terms of stuff, and I'm gonna read up to the point where I basically was like, okay, this is gross. "Breath leaves me in a rush, my face flaming. I know that Nick is aware of what happened between me and his King's Mage, but to me, this news is still fresh. Still information that I don't possess." This is talking about Bree's infidelity in terms of things with Cell, and revealing this in this particular moment for their encounter. "Still information that I don't possess. It is, however, a memory that Cell does not mind sharing." No? When Nick doesn't answer him, Cell's expression turns triumphant. "Well, she did. Pulled my face right down to hers, and I let her. Oh, how I let her." "Stop," Nick commands. "I know what you're doing. It won't work. She tastes like heat and danger and honey and..." Cell shudders. Power. Addictive even without her root. Do y'all know what I want to say about that? I'm probably going to just hold back what I really want to say about that particular piece. That's not okay. That's gross. No. But anyhow, Selwyn, encounters them and then kind of, just conveniently departs at that particular part of the battle and steps aside in terms of that. And the group faces off against Erebus. And of course, this is related to where I said I was done with this novel, in terms of the term that came up. I knew that Alice was likely to be a bargaining chip towards the end of this book, but I did not think she was going to be used in that way in terms of things. And bringing them know that basically, and it explains on page in terms of the limbo loop, in terms of where Alice is stuck in terms of things, and reliving the moment that she failed Bree one more time. That's one of the things that she says while she's perpetually stuck in this memorative loop in her coma, where she's trying to hold up the device and help Bree and them in the final in what was supposed to be the final battle of Bloodmart. She tries to help them and then ends up dying, failing over and over again in terms of things. So knowing that Erebus makes this choice thing for Bree. Either I give you your memories shards back, even though the memories will not be the same as they were when they were taken from you, because you erased your ancestral plane, and it doesn't fit the same way because wounds that have healed over have scabs, and her memories won't fit the same way, but she'll still have her memories. He proposes giving her memories back with that piece over taking Alice out of the coma. What do you think this girl decided to do, knowing up to this point in terms of what Alice is going through versus the memory loss? Technically speaking, she has the people around her, but there's lost memories. She could always make new ones. What do you think she chose? She chose her memories over her perpetually dying, dead best friend. I said I was done. I said I was done at that point. That Bree Matthews has no redemption to me whatsoever. And the worst part of this also was at the point where Erebus makes this choice, offering to Bree. Nick tells Bree either choice she makes is fine. She blew it. Bree blew it. I was stunned. For someone you would think would be best friends, for all the things that Alice did in Bloodmark, and I was happy at the fact that she had more of a role, though it hurt to see that she was put in a coma in terms of Bree's actions, which weren't entirely her doing. It was really author, like in terms of possessing her, that led to that unfortunate thing happening. And in some respects, I could say, okay, I understand, like, you know, the grief and the guilt that she feels in turn, because she does feel guilt about it. But to make that choice, I said I was done. And Erebus makes the off comment that Bree is really ruthless, quote unquote. But oh my gosh. Knowing that what we know, Bree could have just made new memories and dealt with the memory loss. That was a choice, you know, or they could have like found other ways to be able to help her navigate into her stuff. But she gave up her best friend's life, and I would say that Alice is in a worse state than death at this point. She's in this perpetual state of suffering. That's worse than death. I said at that point, nope, I'm done. I'm done with this series at this point. I don't think it's going to get better. The fact that Bree Matthews, who is supposedly this hero, which I don't believe that at all, she chose her memories over her best friend suffering in perpetuity. And we're in the final pieces of the novel at this point, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell y'all the ending because this is spoiler territory in terms of things, and it only happens over the course of several of the remaining pages that happen. The final battle happens. Mariah does everything she can to up to the point where she can anymore in terms of fighting against the Shadow King Erebus. Erebus is weakened in terms of giving Bree back her memories, back the shard that she was missing. And Selwyn shows up, basically, and I said this in terms of, like, I almost laugh about it a little bit because there's a reference to the sun and moon that happens close to the end of the novel where Sel is taunting Nick and Bree, and I'm like, that feels like a Final Fantasy VII reference, and it was a very good one in terms of how the relationship between Sephiroth and Cloud pans out. And I said to one of my buddies, like one of the people who knew that I was reading this, you know, that was a badly referenced Final Fantasy VII thing in terms of stuff, because it means that Cell is Sephiroth and Bree is Cloud, at which, if you know the story of Final Fantasy VII without going into spoilers in terms of Cloud's memory loss and some of the things that happen with him in terms of that narrative, I'm like, if that was supposed to be a reference, it was not a great one. I'm like, nah. It's like Cell comes across as a very weak version of Damon from the Vampire Diaries, as well as Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. He just kind of conveniently shows up and kills Erebus, and then battle's done. Hey, Shadow Crown is up for the taking. They try to warn Cell, you can't just pick up the crown and do what you want with it for yourself. He touches the crown and instantly dies in a painful death. Painful death. I was like, oh no. Oh no. I'm like, the Selwyn girlies are not going to be happy with this in terms of stuff. I wonder what would have happened if it ended there. I wonder how much of a revolt would have happened if it ended there. But oh no, it gets worse, and it kind of becomes obvious in terms of the final few pages that Cell isn't really dead. He becomes the new Shadow King because the Shadow King Erebus was actually his father in terms of things, and he becomes the new Shadow King, which means he controls Bree's blood mark now. Black girl trauma, though. Black girl, is this black girl magic when yet another white person controls a black girl? In terms of things, I said I was done. I said I was done. I was so over it and done by the time I finished this book. That was a summation of everything that happened in Oathbound. And we're supposed to get a fourth book out of this. And a resolution after all of that slog. I'm done with this series. I'll probably read summaries of what happens in the fourth or fifth book if it comes to a fifth book in terms of things. If she's not able to wrap it up, I am done. I am absolutely 100% done. I do not care about Bree Matthews. She is a horrible human being, a horribly selfish human being who does not care about anybody truly but herself. And I can say that 110% from the events of this novel. Even with having her memory wiped, this book tries to convince you that she's a hero, that she's a great person, that she is doing all these different things. She did not do a doggone thing or learn anything in the scope of this novel. All the slog, all the working through all of these different things, and we end up there. And y'all are wondering why I am upset. And why I gave this 1 out of 5 stars, deservedly so. Deservedly so. Technically speaking, I did tag this as 0 stars is too much for this, but I was like, you know what? There were still some moments in here where, like, you know, like, I did appreciate in terms of what it had to offer, and I'll tell you even those moments because they were very far few in between. I liked the moments between Will and Larkin, what little we saw of that. I liked the moments where Nick did genuinely treat Bree, like, you know, in terms of things where, like, you know, he was reconnecting with her and realizing that she didn't remember him. I liked the fact that we saw a bit more of Bree's father in terms of things and realized that he knew more than he himself did in terms of things, and at least being able to see him in terms of that we could have seen a lot more of him if this were a different narrative. But, you know, Senator the white woman who objectifies her and sexualizes her son. And I like the fact that Mariah was able to step up in the way she did, even if I didn't like how that was done in terms of undermining her every step of the way. At least she had more of a presence in this novel, but I hate that it was essentially undermined in terms of her perspective being in service to Bree. Just basically the same way as every other character who did that character terribly. But yeah, I said I was done, and now y'all know why. The black girl magic, am I right? Mm-mm. And I think it's well worth me concluding this video with saying that there were so many more interesting directions that the Legendborn series could have gone versus this in terms of things. I know there are going to be a lot of people who try to explain around this being a very deep, detailed narrative in terms of things about how black girls were subjected to, how black women were subjected to manipulation. I've even seen one argument, which was such a foolish argument, I didn't even entertain it in terms of things, how Henrietta Lacks don't even try it. You can make the point that there was experimentation done on these root crafter girls, of the exploitation that they were done for their magic, and how that centered in terms of Bree's manipulation, in terms of like how she was tested when she was mesmered and basically tortured and interrogated and blood marked. But don't you dare bring Henrietta Lacks into this respective conversation in terms of the lack of development and the sidelining of these black girls that was done in this narrative. If you're going to make that your main point, you make it your main point. You do not make it as a side point to a narrative that centers on this situation where a black girl is already being abused by another person in order to hone her power, and then yet we come back to the same type of racism in terms of things where she is her blood and the root crafters like discovery in terms of how the council is pursuing them is because of Bree. Black girl trauma and exploitation. Whole way around. This narrative was not black girl magic. It was not even making a candid point to centering just a side. We started with trauma in terms of Bree making that deal with the Shadow King with Erebus before Erebus was ousted, and now we have it where Bree and her blood mark is controlled by Selwyn Kane. The root crafter girls, in terms of how they were trafficked for their magic and their bodies to be able to be manipulated by the council, who is still this the side story to this respective scheme of events. Potentially lends into more root crafter girls possibly being trafficked, stolen. No kind of relief. No kind of joy. And I think I feel confident enough to say, yeah, I'm done with the Legendborn series. I don't even want to pick it up anymore. I think Legendborn was a flash in the pan moment. It had some things about it that worked, but Bloodmarked and Oathbound really just drove it into the ground. And I don't think it's going to recover from that. I struggle to see how it's going to recover in terms of Tracy Deonn being able to salvage a lot of this in terms of being, just a lot of trauma that really relies on the exploitation of black girls and the violence against black girls and even women, even speaking about Sel's mom, just violence. You know what? I don't want to follow that. To speak to what I think might actually happen, like somehow something happens to Mariah in the next book, and that's used, and Mariah's used as a means to an end yet again for Bree's growth, which would be the laziest move to make in terms of things, and it does not do justice for Mariah's character. I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm going to make a prediction. It might happen. I don't know. I really don't want to follow it, and I am not invested in the series anymore. I'm really not. So that is it for my review of Oathbound by Tracy Deonn, the third book in the Legendborn series. This is basically the point where I'll stop, and I'm probably going to offload my books for the Legendborn series, because I don't even really want to pick it up in terms of things, because it's the first time in a while where I've picked up a book that has soured completely my experiences with the entire series in terms of the direction it goes and the choices it makes for its respective narrative, and I can't get behind that in terms of things. So I will leave it there. I've already talked enough. This is probably going to be a long, nightmarish video for me to edit, but at least y'all are more informed of where my anchor for this respective book, for this respective series comes from, and we're going to kind of just leave it there. So If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to be informed when I post new videos. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next video, and hopefully with a better book that I have finished and read in terms of things versus this one.